Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Stewart, and I'm facilitating a conversation with my good friend and buddy, Peter Scalzo. He's been on his own 18-year cancer journey, and we're going to kick off another topic today and talk a bit about something that I think is worth examining in your own life. And we titled this White-Knuckling It. What are your white-knuckling moments? And so I think Peter's going to share a few of those today. But I'll put a little bit up front is because this podcast is Cancer and Peace is, when you're holding on to something super tight, when you're holding on to it so tight that it's all you can think about, and like all your strength and energy is going on to hanging on to that. If you look at the back side of your knuckles, you'll see that that's white knuckling. It's the amount of energy that you're putting in to hanging on to something. And I know in my own life, there's a lot of areas that I've white knuckled it or tried to work in strength and holding on to things. And I put out this concept. I think I even shared it in a prior podcast, but I'll put it again because it was just a really powerful concept. And it was in the story in Exodus. In the story of Exodus, God's giving Moses direction as they're going through the wilderness. And he tells, there's a point in the journey where the nation of Israel is needing water and they're crying out because they're in need of water. And he tells Moses to speak to the rock. And Moses doesn't speak to the rock. Moses is angry about where things are at, and he's working in his own power, and he goes and strikes the rock. And striking the rock really meant, and it symbolized him working in his own strength. And not working in the power of God and the logos of God and his word. And that spoke to me a lot because I look at my own life and there's so many areas where I've been working in my own power. I've been trying to hang on to something super tight, whether it be ministry, whether it be family or marriage or relationships. And so to give an idea then, just this is kind of what white knuckling looks like. So I'm going to throw it to you because I know that you've had white knuckling experiences and thinking about it from a cancer journey.
Yeah,
I think is an important thing to do. And I think we're both going to say you can't be working from a place of peace if you're white knuckling it. And so I'm going to throw it to you and let you put some examples out there or thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. I think it's that fine line between control and surrender. And I think I know I'm tempted to want to control my circumstances. And so even within the context of a cancer journey, I want to exert control over it. And what does that look like? For me, it may be not only researching and even sort of dictating to my health team how I think things should go and be, but just sort of even in my attitude and in my heart thinking, okay, if X, Y, and Z happens, then I'm going to get the result that I want with this journey. And besides my own example, I just want to use one of my buddies who actually, he and I started our cancer support group and that meets at our church 17 years ago, but he was diagnosed with colorectal cancer and great guy. We spent talking to each other. We talked to each other probably every day for about 6 years and he passed. He passed at the age of 52, but as he was an IBM vice president. And so, corporate people and I know corporate people. And I think in the corporate environment, it pays to be a sort of a controlaholic, to be in control of your little sphere.
Just for the record, Peter's not saying that as we know who you are.
Yeah.
We know because we've been these people and are these people in some way still.
Yeah. I mean, and I practiced law for, 23, 24 years. And there was a certain, I wanted to control every piece of what was going on with the client, with the transaction, whatever I was working on.
Yeah.
But he was totally documenting and strategizing and thinking through every aspect of his cancer journey. And I remember he had a 3-ring binder and it was beautifully organized. It was a beautiful binder. And he was going around to all over the nation of not only cancer treatments, but all of the alternatives. He was taking a lot of supplements, everything to try to strategize this cancer journey. And it was a metastatic cancer journey, he found out after a while. And I remember one day he was going to walk the dog and he took his 3-ring binder and threw it in the garbage pail because he was at a point in his cancer journey where he couldn't, and I think white-knuckling to me means, almost like a roller coaster or when you're driving in snow. It's that, oh my gosh, I'm scared. I don't know what to do with that fear. I need to control my situation. But there's this temporary aspect to it. You know that at some point the snow is going to stop and I'll get to my destination, or the roller coaster ride, I'm going to get to the end of the ride. And
but you feel tension in the middle of that.
Yes,
too.
There's tension, and there's almost like a you're not mindful anymore of your own emotions and stuff. You're just sort of like out of control.
Single-minded.
Yeah, single-minded. And I think that it's only normal and natural to be in that position, right? Because that's, for me, for 10 years of my cancer journey, I had 14 surgeries, and I had diagnoses and some recurrences. I had what we thought was a recurrence, which turned out not to be, but I would sort of white knuckle my surgery. The result, yes, I was a Christian, God-fearing. I was surrendering it to God, but I was still sort of retaining control. Like, I got this. The surgery is going to result in an eradication of the cancer and everything will be fine. And yes, that was consistently happening for 10 years. And then that's why I call my 2015 surgery the game changer, the sea change.
I was going to mention that in a bit.
Yeah,
because
that's why.
White-knuckling is what comes before the wall.
Yes. Okay, tell me.
I'll get to that. We'll come back to that because I think this is white-knuckling is a precursor to the wall, because God brings walls to our lives to almost move us into a reliance, or not almost, to offer us the opportunity to move into a reliance on Him mode. But it takes walls, it takes the crisis, because what your buddy got to and what happens in our lives is that when we move out of denial that we can control.
Yes.
And we recognize that our life is out of control,
right.
and we need a power greater than ourselves.
Right.
That's what the wall does for us, is it shatters that false premise that we can control this. But I wanted to ask a question before we went too far into the wall piece. And we have a episode out on the wall, I believe, that's been out there for a little while. But I think the thing that was interesting that I was curious about, remember a long time back, Keller talked about all marriages start out transactional. And when I thought about it, it's like Keller never talks absolutely like that. But when I thought about it, I was like, that's probably true.
Yeah.
And so I have a question back for you. It's in the same vein as this. And it's like,
excuse me.
Do all cancer journeys start out white-knuckling? And what I mean by that, and you might have examples that it's not, and that's why I'm interested, but I'll set it up like this, is when you first get diagnosed, that first thing is, hey, I need to research. I need to go find out and learn and see, and what are all my options and what can I do? The do mode kicks in. I'm going to guess that if not all, most cancer journeys start out white-knuckling. I'm going to build my binder.
Yeah, and you do hear, like I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and some really driven military guy had a brain tumor. It was on the Wild at Heart podcast, and he researched the heck out of it and found out that there was a school that specialized in, it was the only place he could go, and he in fact ended up living through that, and he was given a really rough prognosis. So, and also we had April on our podcast, and she said she experienced peace right off the bat. But I will tell you, in my experience, those are exceptions to the rule.
That's my expectation too.
Yeah. So the rule is that the moment cancer's mentioned, it's like you've been punched in the stomach, the wind's taken out. At least that was my experience. I became nauseous and wanted to throw up, and I had to lay down on a doctor's table,
But
examining table.
once that initial knockdown, you
Yep.
regain yourself.
Yes.
Then the very next thing is let's get up and fight.
Yes. Let's get up and fight. And I still think that's okay, right?
I'm
That's
not
a
at all.
normal response.
I think really actually thinking about almost like if we think about, the Maslow's hierarchy for life or whatever,
Right.
there's stages that you go through or stages of
Right.
grief. There's stages you go through in your cancer journey.
Yeah.
It looks to me like that this is one of the normal expected stages. And it's not as if any one of them are bad.
Right.
They are a
Well,
reality.
and also the
if
other,
you get stuck,
yeah.
I think the whole thing is like, maybe the whole point of this conversation is if you get stuck in white knuckle mode,
Right.
you will never get to peace. And you probably are not going to get to healing either because your body is stuck in a really bad place.
Yeah. Like I was thinking about the person who does not get engaged in sort of what's going on in their cancer journey. I've been around some Christians who have said, "Oh, God's got this." To me, that's walking in denial. It's okay to surrender your situation to the Lord, but He's also given all kinds of options, treatment options, and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, we would never want to speak against,
right?
Because I think we've had these podcasts
Yeah.
where early on, what do you do? And hey, go take time,
Right.
work through your diagnosis. But
Right.
once you get to a point where you've made a decision, run with that decision. Don't second guess.
Yeah, I mean, because how I counsel people is that I have a responsibility to my loved ones to find out what's out there to treat my cancer. And yes, I have been with people who have not done that, and they've kind of deferred to a really kind of a treatment which didn't really have any data to it, and they've passed. And I'm not saying that if they did this other treatment, they would have lived. I don't know that. But I'm always in the school of thought that is, find out what your options are. You owe that to your family and to yourself to at least explore the options. And for me, it would be God surrendering each option to the Lord to try to get guidance. What's your option for me, Lord?
That last word is the key. I think it's when you don't surrender.
Yeah.
Then you work from white knuckling. It's when there's never enough.
Right.
It's when it's never enough that you're still looking to the nth degree.
Right.
I'm going to travel the world over and over again, and
Right.
I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it
Right.
again. It's I can't surrender to.
Right.
Is I think what we're talking about.
So I believe firmly that God wanted me to be in a position where the white knuckling failed. And that happened after my 14th surgery in 2015. I talk about it a lot in this podcast with the 3 surgeons and waking up in ICU to find out that it wasn't like my previous 10 years. This situation was dire. It was metastatic. It was all throughout the area. He was taking tumors out that were wrapped around my aorta. I could have bled out. And, it was a dire surgery. In fact, my surgeon, who's one of the best in the nation, said it's one of the most extensive surgeries he's ever done in urology. And it was a horrible prognosis and a horrible diagnosis. And at that point, all those previous times where I had said to myself, everything's going to be fine, I'm going to wake up, the cancer's going to be gone, I have to do a long recovery, but I can do it because I know I'm going to live and I'm going to get back to my life as normal, right? Not with this. This was oh my gosh, I don't have any control over this situation. My life is not going back to normal. In fact, it looks like I'm going to do an end-of-life process. How do I function in this space?
This is good. I love this part of your story. And I think I'd like to say what I'd be interested in hearing about is how do you divide whether or not you're white knuckling in this space? And we put some words out there, your need to control,
Yeah.
And maybe be interesting to think about what are some questions you would ask yourself to know whether or not you're in white knuckle space. And the
Yeah.
reason why I think this is important is your cancer journey is an important journey. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
bringing, it's not just about a medical journey. It's about life and relationships that you're
Mm-hmm.
having that are really important. And to try to hang on to control, we know from recovery is usually one of the biggest issues where you're hurting other people around you. And when you're become a control freak, you're hurting other. It's an abusive trait. A trait
Mm-hmm.
of an abuser is a control freak. And so as you think about white knuckling in your journey, what I like about your journey is that um, you've talked about a bit this point in the journey where I say I like about it. I don't know if I like it in the way it sounds, but there's a point where there was no medical solution.
Mm-hmm.
And the moment there was no medical solution, you had to turn to solutions that were um, they weren't solutions are that are easily known.
Mm-hmm.
If you know what I'm saying, you had to release control of your life,
Yeah.
and in this case, you released the control of your life into God's care and control. And surprisingly, in the process, miraculously, a medical solution came along. So I think it was
It was 2 years later, cancer was all throughout.
yeah,
And then it was go home, we're done.
yep,
And I had just given over. You're right. I had given over to God what would happen, and then a medical solution. The only option I really had came out.
yeah,
You know,
and
but I was thinking, and I think I'll just say it now. I went down to Memorial Sloan Kettering, a major cancer center near us, and it was for a second opinion for a beautiful Christian woman and her spouse. And but I could already tell when we were going down, she had already surrendered her journey to God.
mm,
And this was just another piece.
how could you tell? That's the question.
Yeah, because of her her peace that I saw in her life, the way she was speaking about it, her countenance, everything about it. She had just surrendered this journey to God, and it was evident. You could just tell.
And that's the questions I always wanted to get to. So
Yeah.
this whole point about, and I think it probably is a lot to do with examining how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we talk about the heart check in recovery, hurting, exhausted, angry, resentful, tense.
Mm-hmm.
If any of those things exist,
Mm-hmm.
it tells you that you need to actually do an examination on what's going on in your recovery journey,
Mm-hmm.
because those are all signs that something is not right in your journey of trust. And so I think those might be the very tool that you would think about
Yeah.
in this is, are you hurting, exhausted, angry, resentful, or tense?
Mm-hmm.
Then you're probably white knuckling it
Mm-hmm.
in this journey.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just sort of soften it just a little bit
Yeah.
to say that even if we surrendered our journey to the Lord, we all still struggle with emotions like that. So
I was going to say, it needs to be different than the recovery one, because I would guess everybody
yeah,
that's doing chemo is going to feel exhausted.
yes,
Is a great, I mean, so it doesn't mean that you're white knuckling it. Is the
yeah,
point I think you would want to make.
yeah.
And everybody who's
Usually,
hurting with the pain
usually
of
fear is the number one emotion, and
anxiety. Yeah.
yeah, anxiety, and then sadness if things are looking not great, and even anger, things are not
I
looking
think the
that great.
T is probably that tense.
Yeah, that's a biggie. That's a biggie.
Do you feel tense? It's probably a
Right.
big one. Yeah. So it's good to examine
And
these because
right, I think that, so let me just put it this way. It's absolutely normal to have anxious feelings when you're going through a cancer journey. In fact, if you weren't experiencing some apprehension, maybe you're walking in denial and not really understanding what's going on. But the issue is, what do I do with that tension? anxiety. How do I process that? I mean, I think it's the
Yes.
same way when Scripture says "fear not" so much. It says that because we fear. It's a common human experience
Excellent point.
to
Yeah.
fear.
Thanks for redirecting this because this is such a good point.
Yeah. So I think the issue for me is like I've got to get a PET scan coming up, and we call it scanxiety. But I know that I'll be anxious prior to it, so I'll process that. Peter, what's going on? What are you scared of? And well, I'm scared of a recurrence. I'm scared of them finding something. Peter, have you been down this road before? Yes, I have. And my faith is built on a bedrock of experiences of bringing God into those situations. And it's like, oh yeah, Lord, I remember you're with me always. I kind of repeat those
Yes.
truths.
So it's not so much do you feel it now. So the
Yeah.
starting point is you do have those feelings. And then if you're
Yeah.
hurting, if you're exhausted, if you're angry, if you're resentful, if you're tense,
Yeah.
the question isn't then this is really
Right.
good. So you've gotten to there's something to examine.
Yes.
And then once you start examining it, is yeah, of course I'm hurting. I've just had a surgery, or
Yeah.
of course I'm exhausted. I've just gone through a round of chemo, and it always knocks me out.
Right.
Are you angry? Well, why am I angry? What am I
Right.
angry about? And where is this anger coming from? Am I angry at God, at my family, at others? And then if
Yeah.
I feel tense though or anxious, where am I going with
Right.
that?
I've got a couple friends right now who are in end stages, and they're struggling emotionally, and I expect that. That's normal to struggle. And this is my point. It doesn't mean they're white knuckling it, but they're experiencing, even though they've surrendered their journeys to God, they're experiencing kind of a normal emotional response to what they're facing. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
And so I think processing those emotions that come up with a journey that are normal is different than, hey, I got this. I've talked to people in the cancer space that I got this. I can do this. I'm fine.
Yeah.
And you know what? Okay, that's fine. The tumor goes out and you've got a clean bill of health. I thought that way too. But when that 14th surgery rolled around and I had that severe metastatic diagnosis, I didn't have it anymore. I knew I didn't have it.
Well, I'll even at least make a guess here, and you
Yeah.
can correct me if I'm wrong. Even in those times when it wasn't there, there's no peace.
Yes, that's true.
And so
That's true.
no matter whether the tumor is there or not on the backside,
Right.
whether there's peace or not is the difference between what you just said is I got this or I've surrendered this.
Right.
And so what I think my takeaway in listening to this conversation, I have a sense that, we've gone through a few layers of this is it's not the feeling. It's getting to the heart of, am I trying to overmanage this?
Right.
Not that it's not important to you mentioned earlier on there's responsibility.
Yeah.
To find proper treatment and to dot your I's and cross your T's and do the things that you should be doing along the way. It's when you get to much further into the journey and you can't let go because it has to work under your power or not.
Right.
This is the white knuckling,
Right.
and there's no peace in that.
And that's exactly right, Sean. Thanks for summarizing that. And it gets back to, for me, acceptance. Have I accepted this journey for myself that God has allowed me to be on? Have I accepted where I'm at in the journey? Am I looking to God to see how he wants to transform me in this journey? Does God have a physical healing for me? Does God have an emotional or spiritual healing for me? What's going on? I mean,
you learned those questions from the wall.
Yes. And I've seen really well-meaning Christians that say things to me like, I'm believing that I'm going to get a healing. I'm standing on that belief. And I've talked to people where the physical healing didn't come.
Now you're going to delve into something that's hard, but I think I had this conversation with a buddy this morning and it was really good. But,
Okay. Yeah.
well, you hear this, I'm gonna risk offending some people. Is that okay? You're looking at me like, I don't know.
This is the Cancer and Peace podcast. Oh, hold on. I'm the host, right?
You're the host. Yeah. You get to make decisions.
You're the facilitator.
Yeah.
So in the interest of great discussion, go ahead.
All right. Well, we had this conversation and it was, a lot of times you hear this concept in the Bible of, taking the Lord's name in vain. And the concept, we have in modern parlance have put that as, don't say, God's name when you're cussing. It's like,
Right.
And so if I'm going to condemn something, don't put God's name in front of that. And so we use that as our key example of it. But what that really means is don't speak for God when he hasn't spoke. Don't say words that God hasn't said. But if God has said, walk in them. But my point to that is that using God's name in vain is saying God told you something, and if you didn't hear God tell you that, or if you're vainly tossing around what you believe God wants, but you don't actually have that word from God, that's using the Lord's name in vain. And I think this is something I feel like, and I say that only I experienced this with my mom when she passed from cancer. Is people came in and it's like, hey, God's told me that she's going to be healed in 2 weeks or the next week or two or whatever, and within 2 weeks she was dead. And I look back and I recognize that that wasn't truth, and we put our own spin on it. Well, in one sense, ultimately she was healed. She's in eternity with her Maker, and so we could put a spin on it. But that's not what they meant. They meant she was going to be physically healed of cancer.
Right.
And that's using the Lord's name in vain, speaking
Wow.
for God, something that he didn't actually give them. And the proof is in what happened. And so I say that in the sense of this is a form of white knuckling because it's
Wow.
people trying to take control
Mm-hmm.
and even speak for God.
Mm.
And if God's spoken to you that he's going to heal you,
Mm.
trust him.
Mm-hmm.
But if he hasn't, don't white knuckle it. Listen for his voice. Release your journey to him. I think that's the message I would have on the backside of this from my own experiences. So,
yeah, thanks for that word, Sean. I never knew, had not put that meaning to that, but it makes a lots of sense. And I do have examples, lots of them in my life.
Yeah.
People that have spoken for God and it's not been correct.
Yeah.
And I've seen damage done.
Yeah.
Especially to other people who aren't as rooted, maybe. I don't know what the word would be, but I'll just share something that I have not shared with you before, and I'll do it quickly. As I was driving in to see the doctor, and I was going in to get scoped in his office, and I had been scoped once before, and I was being scoped again. The tumor in my bladder was what we were watching. That was indicative of the cancer everywhere. And so it had gone from a tennis ball to a golf ball size. As I was driving in, a movie scene was played, and it was him, me in his office, him inserting the scope, taking out and saying, the tumor's gone, the tumor's gone. Okay. And having this feeling, this sensation about, wow, that's, at that point, went in, it played out exactly as what that scene was.
That's amazing.
In my mind. And, obviously God had put that like scene in my mind. But that's an example, I think, where I didn't stand up and say, I know what you're going to say to the doctor, because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
But afterwards, I'm like, oh, wow, that was from God. That was something he was going to do.
It was meant for you.
Yes, it was meant for me.
Which is such a great share.
Yeah.
It wasn't meant as a way to prove to him that you knew something, that you were a prophet. It was meant for you as God's gift to you. What a great gift.
Yeah.
What a great gift.
Yeah.
Well, we're getting close to time here.
Okay.
I think people have an idea of what we're talking about when it comes to white knuckling. I appreciate the fact that you're sharing. You help clarify a lot, and so we don't want anybody who's listening to this podcast to feel condemned if they feel anxiety or
Right.
tension. But I think we're asking, and what I think I hear you asking is, but examine.
Mm-hmm.
And the greatest gift you can get towards peace is as you examine, just start releasing that stuff to God. Start releasing it to God, and that is where you're letting go of the white knuckle.
Yeah, and just on that again, is in the hospital, God spoke to me and said, I wired you with emotions.
Yeah.
So I speak through them, but don't let those emotions rule over you.
That's a great word. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to clarify something else. We mentioned the wall a couple of times, and maybe it's just worth just mentioning here so that people understand that I said the wall comes on the backside of white knuckling. And I think what happens is whenever we are actually white knuckling, in other words, we're trying to work from our power, what happens is crisis greater than what we can control comes to our lives. And we've seen this over and over in the recovery spheres. So we call it the wall. It's like a great moment of crisis, and it's not a flat tire, on the way to work. It's not a small event. It's a major life event that's greater than what you can control comes in your life. And it's an invitation to let go and to surrender. And we use this term a lot of journeying through the wall. And so I believe firmly, and I think you do too, that a cancer journey is generally a journey through the wall. You're journeying through something that's completely out of your control. It doesn't mean that you don't have decisions to make and choices along the way, but what ultimately happens is out of your control. And you're going to journey through the wall and learn how to trust in the middle of that wall. And so I put that out there just so we're not talking just code here and people have an understanding of what we're trying to say.
The weekend that we had our, I don't know if you want to advertise it, but the Wild at Heart weekend, there was a phrase, and it was strength through dependence. And I just really love that. That resonated with me. I'm strong when I depend on Jesus.
Your higher power.
Yeah, my higher power.
Well, we hope you got something out of this today, and we're going to talk about maybe the antithesis of this next week or our next podcast, or that's our game plan anyway. So I won't promise how it'll play out once our producer puts it up, but we'll be talking about the other side of this in a future podcast. But thanks for listening today.
Thank you.
If you want to get a lot more resources, go to cancerandpeace.com, and you'll see Peter's book and several other resources that we refer to on a regular basis. But thanks for listening.
Thank you. I know.